welcome to the Weekly Artifact. This is a tri-weekly podcast created by two friends who met in undergrad and, against all odds, decided to keep talking to each other. I'm your host, Justin, joined as always by my co-host, who, when told he almost hit a person with his car, responded, "What person?"
I never saw him. I still have. No, I did exactly when we were like an inch from each other in between my driver glass. I remember he said I looked over and he was right there. Oh, I'm Alex. The internet moves fast. The hot takes of today are less than a distant memory by tomorrow. We're here to slow down and recover the content that's been lost along the way in order to make sense of where the world was, where it is, and where it will be. To that end, we've each chosen an artifact from the web to discuss together.
Our comments are our own and are not associated with any institution. The show may contain explicit language or themes, so see the show notes for specific content warnings.
Justin, what do you got for us today?
So my artifact today is a video from the YouTube channel Feminist Frequency titled Body Language and the Male Gaze, and it's from the Tropes vs. Women video game series that the channel did, and this video is from 2016. So the video starts off with the premise that body language tells us something about the character, so that's like its overarching claim that then builds on throughout the rest of the video, and it gets into specifics. Starts off talking about the game Destiny, where you begin the game with a character creation system, and basically the game does some things well with this. It gives it credit for making the armor between the characters mostly look the same, regardless of what gender you choose. But the characters end up moving quite differently depending on if you choose a male or female gender. And the clip it shows is of them sitting down. So if you choose the male character, they sit upright, versus if you choose the female character, they sit kind of like laying on their sides. The host of the video, Nia Sarkeesian, describes it as the woman is sitting, quote, like she's Ariel from The Little Mermaid. Goes to some more games, continuing on this theme of movement, revealing something. It moves on to Ninja Gaiden and sort of how you can portray like the expertise of that character as a ninja, versus in Uncharted. It shows that character moves a little bit more clumsily, and that conveys a sense of like relatability. I mean, these are both male characters in those games. And then contrast that to how females' characters' movement often gets sexualized, even if the character's sexuality isn't relevant to that character's personality. And here it highlights some clips from the Batman game showing Catwoman, and then Lara Croft from one of the Tomb Raider games. And you sort of see that their movement doesn't necessarily match what they do as characters, being, in Catwoman's case, like a burglar, and in Lara Croft's case, she raids tombs. I don't really know what the job description of that is, but it also points to other characters maybe can be a little bit better. She points to the female character from Assassin's Creed Syndicate as being less sexualized than Catwoman or Lara Croft, although still has an exaggerated hip sway. Continues on the point of hip sway, talking about in Saints Row 3, another game where you sort of can customize your character. And in this game, you can actually change your character's sex at any time during the game. But even in this game, even though your character is theoretically the same person, just with a sex change, the female character, again, has this exaggerated hip sway and just a different walking style than the male character, even though in theory it's supposed to be the same character. She addresses the point that, high heels could cause this hip sway, but that, that doesn't explain why, these female characters would be wearing high heels in combat situations. She then cites the theory of the male gaze from a essay from 1975. Yeah, 1975 essay from the writer Laura Mulvey, where she theorizes the term male gaze, which is basically just the tendency in visual arts, and in her case she was talking about movies, and in this case obviously we're talking about video games, but but the tendency of visual arts to assume a stereotypical heterosexual masculine viewer player of the media. And so from here, she shows a lot of shots that exemplify the male gaze from the games Tomb Raider, Bayonetta, Metal Gear Solid 5, Mass Effect 2. So the Tomb Raider one, you see Lara Croft. It's a bottom-up view of her like climbing up this mine shaft. The Bayonetta one is particularly kind of egregious, just kind of like close up of her on all fours from behind, which then like zooms in even closer for some reason. The Metal Gear Solid one,
For
she's
some
just
reason.
like she's just showering in a bikini. And the Mass Effect one, it's just two women having a conversation, but the camera is just like positioned at butt height from behind one of the women. And obviously, like you would never really see that with like a male character, where it's just kind of like sitting on their butt, even though they're just having a conversation or whatever. But she anticipates some potential critiques. Talks about how the solution is not to create some sort of quote unquote female gaze, partially because there's not the same sort of stereotypes about males that you can sort of use in this harmful way, and also because if you try to portray like like the stereotype of like the shirtless muscle bound male in video games or whatever is more of like a male power fantasy than like the reversal of like the heterosexual gaze from the male. So it's either way, it doesn't really serve the same function. You're either kind of just like reusing the female gaze, or you're just playing into like male power fantasies. And then she concludes by bringing up The Last of Us as an example of a female character. The female character in that game as an example of someone whose movement is appropriate to her characterization. And then the quote at the end just says, "The path to equality and liberation does not lie in equally reducing men and women to objectified parts, but by treating people of all genders and with all types of bodies as full and complete human beings." So that's the artifact. And I'll say off the top, I don't have a whole lot to say about the actual content, which is actually the fact that I don't have that much to say about the actual content is sort of part of my larger point, which I'll get to. But I will, make just some initial comments about the actual video first. It's I think it's all pretty basic stuff for the most part. It would be hard to make any sort of like good faith disagreement with most of it. Emphasis on good faith.
Well, no, I have the floor. One of the videos she chose was from Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, and it was the woman that was showering in a bikini. But what you don't know about this, Justin, is that Quiet has a parasite infection that makes it so that she has to breathe through her skin. That clothes would be suffocating her, as per the creative director of the game, giving her an explanation that everybody would be satisfied with. So, try again, sweetie.
Touche. All right, I guess we could just end my segment here then.
All the consequences of her video series were now justified retroactively.
What I do really like about this video, though, is just the examples she used. I think really drive home some of her points. Like, I think a lot of it, you could potentially make without the examples, and you would kind of a general sense of it. But she puts together some really great clips to go along with what she's saying.
Mm-hmm.
And because a lot of times I think some of this stuff, it's easy to kind of just breeze past it if you're seeing it in real life at real time, but seeing it all together here at once I think helps. I'll also say, not as disagreements, but I do think there maybe is more to say about like Catwoman and Bayonetta, because I don't know if that's as much about the male gaze. It's just about like it's not like the visual representation in some ways does match those characters' personalities, but then the question is like, why are the characters' personalities written in that way? So it's like not necessarily just the camera in their cases. It's like also it's like very much intentional. I feel like with them as well. Yeah. Oh, and then the only other thing I'll say about the female gaze point was I think that conversation also can be nuanced more if we think about race too, because I think there is. She says basically like her point is like there's no harmful male stereotypes, but I feel like especially with now people describe it as like Karens or whatever, like you do see that there is like a harmful stereotype of racialized male figures, like the guy who's like bird watching, and then the white woman like calls the police on him just because of how she's like seeing him, which is kind of different than the point she's making, but I think again is something you could discuss as well. Not that we need to get into that here, but that's really my only points on the video before I get into other stuff. Do you have anything other than your defense of the Mass Effect part?
Have you seen? Because what made me think of this, somebody swapped the Batman and Catwoman character models in a Batman game when they were talking to each other.
I saw this. Yeah,
it's hilarious. It's like really bad. You're like, holy shit! And that's what kind of first to me into it. And I've since promptly forgotten in most other video games I've played. But to be fair, most of mine are online first-person shooters, so it's not nearly as horny. So I have that going for me. The Saints Row one was like particularly like weird to me because like it makes sense like with that in the context of everything else. Like obviously they would do the same thing, but to be like you're the same dude as a minute ago, but now it just like to change the gate like that. It sort of seems like somewhat of a nail in a coffin for me. I think this video was pretty well universally acclaimed, and there was no fallout for the creator of the series because of how like sort of well researched and argued it was with like hard reference points within games. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because YouTube now got rid of the dislike bar, which I actually think is good. But like, if you look at the video now, and I think comments are turned off. Yeah, comments are turned off as well. So if you do look at the video now, you would completely have no idea of like how these videos were received. You would just see that it has almost 8,000 likes and that there's no visible comments on it, which again I actually think is for the better because I think that gets rid of a lot of the toxicity. But anyways, no, like so the real reason I picked this is because this time of like I don't know culture, the internet, I don't know what you want to call it, was like completely wild. A certain type of person was mobilized to like attack these videos and the people that were creating them, and this was all part of like the whole Gamergate thing. Which the one thing I will say about Gamergate, which always I didn't even really realize this at the time, but the whole exigence of Gamergate was like this article that supposedly like represented some sort of like ethical violation, like violation of journalistic ethics or something, but the article never was written. It didn't exist. It was made up. And that was
what?
But but anyways, like I said, we can get into all that. But I just that's like the only thing you really need to know about Gamergate is the one thing that was all based on did not exist. So everything else that came from that was there. Yeah, there's not even like a pretext for it. Anyways, so yeah, so people were just mobilized to like absolutely hate on these videos. And it's just like wild to me because, like I said, it's like there's really, if anything, these videos are like too basic. I think Contrapoints one time, it was in like a live stream that she like recorded or something, but because Contrapoints at the beginning of her making videos was like a little harsh on Anita's like style, I guess. But then later she like basically was like, yeah, like in the past I was kind of too harsh on them. But the reason was because in hindsight I realized that they were just kind of like too basic almost. And I feel like that's really like the biggest critique you can give of them, which is what makes it so wild that like people were just like going in on these. And part of the reason I picked this one was because I thought that this one is just kind of like a nice general one to like think about the male gaze. But I almost picked one that was on strategic butt coverings. That one's called, and that one's the one that has the one where Batman it talks about like Batman's cape covering his butt and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like I actually remember people would like look at that one and be like, no, actually there's like one frame in the game where Batman's cape slightly lifts up, and if you turn the camera, you can get like a brief glimpse of some of his butt. So it's actually his butt's not covered at all, and it's like just as exposed as Catwoman's. And like that was like the level of like
Good faith arguing.
exactly.
I was just like going through old Twitter feeds or something to like try to find like articles or just points of interest to talk about, and then like this came up, and then like having just known like the Gamergate fiasco of the, I'm gonna say mid-aughts, early aughts, 5 years ago. So you know,
Listen, I think the aughts is the first decade.
It is the 10, son of a bitch. Right. We got to start over. Whole podcast. I will not be made a fool again on my own platform. I just listen. You know, you learn the word aughts and you want to just use it. All right. That's just sort of what happened here. Anyway, to like see like this like essay like collection or whatever, this like series that was made was a huge part of the vitriol received, is like insane, of like how, and I'm gonna use maybe an inflammatory word, but how twiggood all of the fucking alpha males got about any of this is insane to me. Just to acknowledge something, it's insane to be mad about. It's just like, it's not like, I mean, she's calling for better, but like, I don't know if any big execs at Sony are sweating over Feminist Frequency. They ought to be, but like, they should do better, but nobody's like forcing them to. They're just like, hey, this exists, right? Fuck you! And it's just, like you said, it's wild out here.
To me, I felt like the phenomenon was always kind of like these, mostly men, mostly white men, but not exclusively, having the feeling that like mom was coming to take their video game away from them or something. Like that's the only way I can describe it, because it was just complete like it was like the epitome of the term man baby, where it's just like, why are you freaking out that like, because like again like, and I mean they always like riled themselves up to and like would pretend that Anita was saying that these games should be like banned or something, which she never said. But that was always like their, because like, unless you come up with some like boogeyman for why any of this matters, then like, there's not going to be a center to hold it. So that was always kind of what it was. It's like, oh, if Anita is critiquing these games, that must mean that she wants them banned. And if we ban all the games, then I'm not going to have any games to play, and then I'm going to be sad. It was like, but I mean, again, like it wasn't like a call to ban them. It was just like a critique of games. And then it was always funny too, because one of the things they would always, hold up as like a counter to Anita's points is like that one study that says that video games don't make people more violent, and then basically saying like, well, if video games don't make people more violent, then that means that they can't have any impact on anyone's behavior or the culture more largely ever, and that's why her videos are bad. But it's like, okay, but then by that same logic, then you shouldn't be critiquing her videos, because if you don't think media can impact anyone, then why are you wasting your time trying to like take her down? Like you should just say, oh well, her videos can't impact anyone because media has no impact, and just move on with your day. So I mean, like any way you slice it, like it didn't make any sense.
My final note will be, I just searched strategic butt coverings, and her video has 783,000 views at 6.5 minutes long. And to scroll down, not even 4 videos is all caps strategic butt covering question mark parentheses rant video that's 21.5 minutes long at 300 views.
I guess that was maybe what was driving a lot of this, is just like, people were making ad money off of, making like these 3 hour long responses to these, 5 to 8 minute videos. And I don't really know why people watch them, other than, again, just kind of like that man baby, how do we stop mom from cutting off her video game time thing or whatever. But yeah, there was like a whole ecosystem of people that were literally like just making like hours long videos. She'll talk about like how female characters' butts are centered in the screen, and people will just be like pulling out the ruler and being like, actually, it's a couple pixels off center, so she lied. Like, and people just kind of like eating this up, like, yeah, this is good stuff. But thinking about all those videos that like we're responding to and stuff, it is interesting that I feel like those videos don't really exist anymore. And the Feminist Frequency channel is still alive. She mostly does podcasts now, and if you look at the videos they make now, it's mostly episodes from the podcast. So I do wonder if her not having video, visual along with the uploads maybe has changed it. Also, obviously the podcast ones are significantly longer now, and so I wonder if that they just can't be bothered to sift through an hour of podcast versus the 5 minute video or whatever. But maybe it's also possible, optimistically, that we're just past this cultural moment.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about that?
No. I think what happened somewhat is that she had a series sort of dedicated talking about this with like short coherent videos, and so like every time a new one would drop, everybody would sort of gather around for the fireside chat and then just fuel the rage machine. Maybe there's something better about sort of a 7-minute video leading into a 20-minute response versus like a tweet versus like a dog pile of quote tweets, but I don't think anybody's less pissed for no reason than they were 5 years ago. But I don't know, maybe Joe Biden's in office, maybe America's healing. You're right, Justin. That's exactly what you said, right?
It feels like a lot of where these people have gone now is just like anti-BLM, now it's like anti-critical race theory, quote unquote critical race theory stuff, which is just kind of like standard racism. Like that's kind of just always there. And so what I'm really, wondering is like, are we about to see like another crop up here in a second? So it was like the only thing I can compare Gamergate to, when I was like just writing my notes up for this before, was the war on Christmas, as something that's like completely unfounded, ridiculous, makes no sense unless you're like 10 levels deep into the conspiracy. When are we gonna get the next like war on Christmas level like outburst coming? Because we don't seem to have that right now. That's really what I'm saying.
It'll show up. I mean, it's percolating, I'm sure. Because it's gonna be something super abstract, right? Like it's like if I was able to guess it, it'd be a bad showing of me. You know what I mean? Like if I had if I was able to see what these people were so mad about all the time, that means I'm too in on it. But I don't know. Maybe like child pageants. I'll guess child pageants. I don't know.
Yeah, the only thing I sort of think something could spring up from is like, what was, I think it was Travis Scott had that concert, and
The
people were
Satanic
talking
Panic
about,
is gonna come back.
yeah, there was a lot
Could
of
be
weird
huge.
like Satanic Panic that was like breaking the normal ideological lines. I don't know what that would like look like.
Yeah,
That was a little bit strange to me.
because like heavy metal's like kind of boomer shit now. D&D's a little too like, I don't know, because it's a little, I think it's a little too in the sort of, because Stranger Things, so it's also boomer shit. Like I don't know, I just feel like it's just me rap music now. Like it's just like it's just racism again. I guess it seems kind of, I don't know, quaint at this point in some capacity. Just like, yeah, man, obviously, like you can't think of anything better. Geez, I guess it's just kind of like sort of like low energy, but I guess.
All right, so that's it for my artifact this week. Alex, what you got for us?
So my artifact is an article written on McLean's.ca by Andre Domis, titled "The Jordan Peterson Slavoj Zizek Debate was good for something." And so the article itself was written a few weeks after Demise wrote another article titled "The Moral Cowardice of Canadian Media is Leaving Racism Unchallenged." But for this article specifically, he mentions that article and then says a journalist friend of his called him up to ask a question about the role news media was playing to combat hate groups. I guess, firstly, this is sort of all centered on this like big 2.5 hour debate between Zizek and Peterson that happened on April 26th of 2019. But we'll sort of get into that in a minute, just sort of take care of the article. But so on the one hand, Demise writes, ignoring white supremacists hasn't worked well so far, and the conventional wisdom among media class, has been, quote, ignore them and they'll go away. And it should be clear by now that he writes that this is utter bunk. And on the other hand, putting a spotlight on them, however, might only provide kindling to the bushfire and help toxic viewers spread even more rapidly than would have been possible without the help of newspapers and broadcast television. And so the sort of pull quote from the top of the article and somewhat of the thesis of this piece is that debate does have its place in debunking bad actors and their ideas, but dialogue with deplorable people too often fails for the reason that it takes place on the wrong turf. It takes example an interview that Kathy Newman did with Milo Yiannopoulos, friend of the podcast. One of the first questions Newman asks Yiannopoulos is referencing Steve Bannon, who was, when the interview happened, Trump's chief strategist, and Steve Bannon is sort of a out and out pronounced
Ghoul
sort of
monster.
Cool monster?
I said ghoul.
Cool, Justin? Steve Bannon isn't cool, Justin.
a ghoul. A ghoul. That's what I get for trying to help you. Right, you're on your own now.
Justin. He's a white supremacist. Holy shit. Newman asked Yiannopoulos, do you think Bannon has regressive attitudes? And then Newman lays out the liberal case of Bannon describing him as a, quote, anti-Semite and white supremacist, asking Yiannopoulos, have they got that wrong? But the point that Demise says that sort of the type of people who build a fan base from alt-right and neo-Nazi trolls like Yiannopoulos has, and even engaging in a speaking circuit called the Dangerous, pass. I'm not going to say it, but have no moral perch from which they can be dislodged. In fact, it took some rather horrific comments surfacing from an alt-right podcast to finally scuttle Yiannopoulos from public life. I can only imagine this is a reference to Milo's pro-statutory rape relationships within the gay community stance. But sort of moving to the sort of meat and potatoes, the Zizek-Peterson debate, there is sort of no moral certitude on trial here. Theoretically, the debate was framed as whether or not Marxism or capitalism sort of could provide more happiness. And with Zizek ostensibly taking the side of Marxism and Peterson defending capitalism, though sort of neither of them really embraced the labels within the debate and sort of even as themselves, whereas Zizek has sort of, quote, built his bibliography on the reflexive mistrust of ideology, and Peterson is less a proponent of capitalism than he is of Horatio Alger's ethics animated through an earthly vessel. Thus, neither of the two spent much time attacking the other's morality. The important thing that the debate revealed, though, was some glaring flaws of Peterson's that his detractors in the media failed to do. Peterson doesn't seem to know much about Marxism, even though his sort of big claim to fame in academia was the sort of cultural Marxism was taking over, and it's sort of just grown as a dog whistle that he's been using and others have used since. And also, Peterson mentioned that he hadn't read Zizek's work and that he'd only recently read the Communist Manifesto from Marx and Engels for the first time since high school. So, which is kind of just a hell of a start. And then the author says he proceeds to stumble through his way through Marxist philosophy with such a shallow assessment as to be laughably incorrect. And then one of the big kickers is that Peterson sort of claims there's a sinister agenda to take over academia, which was rendered completely hollow when Zizek sort of asked him to sort of give him even one name about who that would be, throwing him a couple bones. Peterson could not come up with an answer. And with the falsity of Peterson's crusade laid bare in front of an audience of thousands, the good professor had not done his homework. Go figure, one of those freak things. And even though sort of the debate really sort of ultimately didn't do much of anything in a lot of ways, I think was sort of the general consensus. Zizek did at least sort of create a counterexample to the way that Peterson has handled in adversarial conversations, including a link to the Disasters interview that was once again conducted by a friend of the podcast, Kathy Newman. And though sort of Domis sort of ends with that he doesn't really have an answer yet for his friend, the journalist who sort of asked about sort of the role in the media or like what to do. The debate sort of led him to a closer one, sort of without proper framing and the deftness necessary to attack reactionaries on their own turf. Debate is senseless. You can't moralize at people completely lacking the type of ethics and morals that you have. But if you've done the homework, you can at least show the audience that they're full of something else, which is, in Peterson's case, exclusively red meat. I watched some of the debate, sort of somebody else's edited highlights, but it is 2.5 hours, and I don't know if I can justify giving Peterson that much of my time. There is something to be said about just like how dumb he is in a lot of ways, I think, and a lot of like his like friends are. I only heard about Peterson and Zizek for the first time on Twitter when this debate was scheduled, when somebody tweeted something approximately that this is like having the world championship 12 and under boxing fighting Mike Tyson today. And obviously Peterson being the child and Zizek being the sort of retired old man who's still way better than him at this.
Yes, I didn't watch the full debate. I saw some clips from it as well, but yeah, I'm not going to watch it. I'm a little bit more sympathetic to Zizek than some people, I think. I feel like I actually like how this article kind of characterizes Zizek. Yeah, I mean, there's that one line just says Zizek, in fact, has built his bibliography on the reflexive mistrust of ideology, which I feel like is probably more fair than some of like I feel like especially in like the lead up to the debate there's a lot of like portrayal of him as like some sort of like anti-leftist or something like that, whereas like I know for example he has take that like there's too much I get like he frames it as like there's too much political correctness, but he like means it in the way of like we don't talk enough about like beheading capitalists and stuff like that. And that's kind of like a very loose paraphrasing of his point. But like people just hear like the first part of like, oh, Zizek thinks there's too much political correctness. He must be like Donald Trump or something, whatever. Or it's like, well, no, if you actually listen to what he's saying, he's like giving a much more interesting, nuanced take, and actually a pretty radically left take. But people can't be bothered with nuance or whatever. But I mean, Zizek does also
me
have
neither.
But Zizek has problems too, as well. He's kind of like a class reductionist type. I'll link to this one chapter of an edited collection I read that kind of points to some more damning quotes he gave, kind of just like being not even like hateful or anything, but just kind of like ignorant on like issues of race and gender and stuff. So anyway, that was all a long way of saying like Zizek's kind of a complicated figure. I don't think he's that bad, but he's not like my champion or something. And then Peterson obviously is just a dumbass. And there's not really two ways about that. So I thought the debate was like I didn't watch it mostly because my thing with debates is like I think debates are best when they're between two people who mostly agree and are like hashing out a finer point, and also when both people know what they're talking about. And obviously, Pearson has no idea what he's talking about, so that's why I didn't watch the debate, and that's kind of what I think of the two actors in the debate.
I
I have
was
more to
gonna,
say, but yeah.
I was gonna say, was this debate in some capacity sort of you're thinking of debates the genesis for this podcast, but then you had to ruin it and say both people need to know what they're talking about, so never mind, I guess.
I think this podcast is ideally at its best two people hashing out finer points,
Like
which is
egg, like the economy of egg throwing.
I said that's best.
All right, yeah, best episode yet.
So yeah, and so obviously, like the issue then here is whatever you think of Zizek, Peterson honestly doesn't know what he's talking about. One thing I did think was interesting too about the article was I like that he concludes basically saying like he doesn't have the answers, and I really like the line towards the end where he says the good professor hadn't done his homework. And then he ends with the line you read both of them, but if you have done your homework, at least you can show the audience that they're full of something else. But I do wonder, do people care about homework? And maybe this is almost kind of related to what we were just talking about with like Gamergate and how like the people that were following that at some point just completely do not care about facts or reality at all. So I do wonder, what is like the overlap of people who are like on the fence about Jordan Peterson, but also would care it when they realize that Peterson didn't know what he's talking about. I mean, it seems like to even be ambivalent on Peterson, one of the prerequisites is to like not care if people know what they're talking about, and to yourself not know what you're talking about.
I mean, that's his whole thing, right? So yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I mostly find this article just kind of like interesting as like a thought piece in terms of like thinking about whether this sort of debate can be good or not. I think it makes like a compelling case if you are on the side that debate can be good, of when it can be good. He contrasts it to Kathy Newman, which I think he's being a little harsh on Kathy Newman. I don't have strong feelings on Kathy Newman one way or the other. I don't follow her work or whatever, but just glancing at the interview she did, like they're interviews, not debates. So it's like obviously you're going to give the person you're interviewing more of a platform than the person you're debating, who you're trying to beat versus someone you're trying to get to talk. And then also I feel like there's also like a gendered component where like Peterson and Milo were just kind of like walking over Kathy, and so yeah, I don't know. Like I'm not defending Kathy Newman, but I don't know if he needed to slam her twice like that. Like, show some mercy there.
Please, Andre, she's been through so much.
But anyways, if you do think that this sort of debate could be useful, I think this is the best case you could make for it. I'm still personally a little bit skeptical of it, though.
The one thing about it, and it's not even like the debate me bro, maybe that's that's where sort of Gamergate spent their energy, is just turning into the debate me bros. But well, so Jordan Peterson sort of famously already had died in Russia after eating nothing but ground beef for 4 months, and somebody else is just sort of scamming his like Twitter account, as far as I can tell. But the thing with like him, or like I'm gonna just lump them together, Crowder or like Shapiro, is like, it's just like if you just ask like sort of 3 pointed questions instead of just letting them monologue to themselves for an hour into camera, like, and also you don't let them get any sort of quote unquote zings against like or owns epic wins against teenage college students who have never heard the phrase "no free clout." Most of their stances are sort of pretty immediately like logically unfounded, a la sort of like name one professor that is sort of a cultural Marxist deep spy, or like thinking of like Ben Shapiro's hitting them with the, let's say, the water levels rise over the next 10 years. When don't you think the people that live in the coastline would just sell their houses? And like, obviously, if you just let them keep talking, like you're just like, okay, like, and you just sort of made this a reality. But what if somebody's just like, again, the video, like, to whom will they sell? Like, it's just it's sort of over before it started. And like, I mean, just there's a number of clips, and I think it's just like, for one, just like the advice, it was just sort of like speak somewhat calmly and deliberately and just sort of ask questions without condensation, and then watch them sort of just eat shit.
It's always interesting because I feel like sometimes they have counters, which it's always for just kind of like affect and going for the zing or whatever. Because usually, I mean, these people are not going to debate. I mean, I feel like there's probably a reason Peterson was debating Zizek, who, like I said, is, even under the best sort of interpretation, is still somewhat of like a complicated figure or whatever. But yeah, I mean, they usually try and avoid confrontation with people who actually know what they're talking about. So I mean, this debate is almost kind of surprising in that way, because you can imagine what would happen if you debated even someone who's a little bit more conventional, maybe, or I don't know quite the right word, but
well, I will say that the other thing I saw about Zizek is somebody referred to him as a cocaine raccoon, so take that as you will.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with his little like sniffling thing or whatever, but
I just told you.
the author here says that Milo, quote, self-immolated because of his quote. Did you know that Milo is still getting paid to go on speaking engagements?
I didn't know this. I know that the Koch brothers sort of dropped him like a hot sack of shit after some of those comments, and I saw on Twitter that he was sort of intravenously injecting some sort of horse something or other. I don't even think it was ivermectin during the top of the vaccination. Everybody's just like, this guy is really out of money because everybody else is just sort of like saying they're doing it, but he's like did a video of it. I didn't know he was still walking around talking like a person.
So I'll say at a university campus very close to where I am, he was actually just speaking recently. Yeah, Milo is still speaking, and actually, I don't. You remember how Milo his thing used to be that you can't criticize him because he's gay?
Well, I was gonna say he went from being like I'm a gay conservative to conversion therapy, right? That's his big thing
Yes,
now.
yeah, that was what his talk was about at this campus, at least. And I assume it's probably all he's talking about. I have no idea what actually goes into the talk or whatever. But yeah, it's just called like "Pray the Gay Away." That's like the name of the event. I wonder if that's actually what he's talking about, or if that's just the title of it to like, because that will get people like, oh, he's triggering people or whatever. I just can't imagine him doing like a whole hour on like. I mean, maybe he is,
I
but
mean, I
that.
can see it. To be honest, I can imagine him doing that.
Which I also feel like that says something about the event organizers. If you're like, yeah, we need to bring in someone who's going to tell us how to pray the gay away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could obviously like be whatever you want, but it's just like very. I mean, that would imply that you have acknowledged to yourself that you are gay and are looking for someone to help you pray it away. But
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, it's more just like sad than anything if that's what's happening. It just feels weird otherwise to be like, oh, I'm not gay, but I want to bring in someone who's gonna help other people? Question mark.
Not be
Pray the
gay.
gay away. I mean,
They be
no
gay.
one else is showing up but you and your friends. But
Mm-hmm.
I like the point at the beginning about kind of like this question of do you ignore them or do you risk giving them a platform to try and take them down? I think there's a kind of good PBS Idea channel video that tangentially touches on this. I don't have an answer to it, but I think that's a good question. There's probably something to be said about like how big of a platform do they already have. Sort of similarly, like with Peterson, is a question of like how was his image changed before or after this debate. It'd be kind
Mm-hmm.
of interesting to sort of track. I do think there was a little bit more, like especially when people started pointing out, like, oh, I didn't realize that he literally hasn't read any Marx at all.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was one thing that did kind of emerge and change a little bit. And I think in general, there's like an interesting question about these people whose like only sort of claim to authenticity is like branding themselves as smart, and if we can
Mm-hmm.
like show that that's just a brand and not real, does that ultimately help take them down? Anything else from you?
Just that. I mean, Peterson probably would have done better for himself if he didn't go into debate and stayed in a room just for him. A room with safety.
Safe room.
Hmm. Now, how about that?
All right, Alex, now that we're in the safe room, what do you have on your mind?
I don't know when people. I'm getting. Listen.
What do you have on your mind? The first words I don't know.
I don't know. I've been thinking maybe Steve Bannon is cool. I don't know when people decided that we needed a new type of swearing, or I'm gonna say invented curses, and we talked about it and I didn't have a way to articulate it, and so I did some quick Google searching, and there's an article from the Outline called "The Rise of Swear Nerds," just if anybody else needs some deeper context, but I haven't read it yet, but I'll unequivocally stand by every word of it right now, because I'm in a safe room and I can't be hurt. But sort of some classics are like douche canoe, douche nozzle, fuck waffle, cunt muffin, dick nose. Dick nose is okay. actually. Dick nozzle is dumb. Cock nozzle. Cock womble. These, like, just this, like, weird baby shit about, like, I don't know if it's, like, you think you're doing something or you think that, like, fuck is too cliche, which is an insane take that I can't attribute to anybody directly, but feels like that's where this is coming from. I don't know. Like, it's kind of supposed to be, like, cutesy or funny, or, like, this is a way of, like, getting away with saying fuck if you add waffle to it. So it's like, haha, tongue in cheek or something, but just, like, commit to saying fuck if you're going to say fuck. It doesn't have to be quippy. I don't know if this is like Marvel brain or like Whedon brain or some shit. Kind of feels like it's in the same... Like, if ever Marvel, like the proper MCU, not just like Deadpool, excuse me, if like proper Marvel is going to take like an R turn or like campaign to like the FCC or the MPAA to like let these movies still be PG-13, it's going to be in the context of like hyphenated swears. And it's just fucking repulsive, morally and to the ear. I didn't really realize how ubiquitous this was until I was in a intro to playwriting class, and we were asked what our favorite swears were, and somebody said douche nozzle, and I said, douche is what you meant to say then. If you think douche or douche bag is fine, douche nozzle is not a swear. But like somebody else said fucking, and like that's worse, you know, for a lot of reasons, but it's a better swear. Like, it's two crass things put together as opposed to douche canoe or douche nozzle or whatever the fuck. It's just unjustifiable.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head with the Marvel thing, actually. That was kind of what... Because I was trying to percolate on this a little bit and think about where it comes from. But yeah, I think that's part of this, like, larger trend. Okay, well, I mean, I think like, at the most zoomed out level, there's, like, a general kind of... I don't even really know the best word for it, but...
Infantilizing?
Yeah, I was gonna say like babyification, but that kind of...
That's way better. I like that word a lot more.
But that also kind of sounds... Like, I don't want it to come across as, like, back in my day, or, like...
No, we're pro-baby. We're just not pro-adult baby. Listen.
Yeah, but I do think for whatever reason, though... I think the reason is because the economy is so bad now, and, like, people, like, can't move out of their parents' houses as soon as they used to be able to, if at all. It's taken, in general, longer for people to, like, move on to, you know, the quote-unquote, like, adult phase of life or whatever. Has sort of led to people, like, also clinging on to, like, things that are more associated with, like, childhood for longer. And so I think that's, like, at the largest zoomed out level. But yeah, I think, like, if you look at, like, the Marvel movies, which have become, like, such, like, a cultural force in particular, like, there's, like, they do this, like, weird thing where anytime something's, like, potentially, like, emotional, they always have to, like, undermine it with, like, a joke or something, which I feel like is the same kind of feeling you're getting here. It's like, oh, if you're going to say a curse word, you have to, like, immediately undermine it by saying something, like, random that will then, like, take the edge off.
What if everything was as sanitized as this fucking color palette? You know what I'm saying? Just brutal stuff.
I don't know. Like, I don't really care what people want to say or whatever. Like, it's not really any skin off my back. I mostly think it's just kind of, like, weird and vaguely annoying. I mean, like I said, my main problem is more just, like, I wish people would, like, deal more authentically with their emotions. Like, if you do want to swear, then just swear. Like, don't swear and take the edge off at the same time or whatever. Like, you know, just
cowardice. Like, you have to earn the ramifications of doing it, as well as, like, sort of the, like, reward for it. You can't just, like, I don't know, ride the fence.
Or maybe it was the radical honesty thing. I know we say from that, but I feel like that's related to this. I'm always an advocate for that, where it's, yeah, I mean, I guess if I have any problem with this, it just feels dishonest. It's like, if you're feeling whatever silly enough that you don't actually want to curse, then don't curse. If you want to curse, just curse. Like, I don't know what this, like, in between, I'm cursing but not really, but yes.
100%. And, like, it's mostly, it's somewhat of a non-issue in the sense that, like, there's no actually sort of, like, harm done except to my time, which is actually indispensable, so that's fucked of them. But it tells me that you don't have any good spicy takes, and I don't like your personality. Almost certainly. Like, I'm sure a small percentage of them may have redeeming qualities for people that talk like this generally. Probably not, but I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush here. But
You're in the safe room. You can do whatever you
okay,
want.
yeah, they're all wastes of oxygen. But you hang out with them twice, you hear it twice in a row. There's no third hangout. Like, it's just, there's nothing there for me. And I think like, if nothing else, maybe it's a good thing because it's a good sort of just like litmus test of just like, nah, I'm not going to talk to you again in a non-professional capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's a good thing that it just helped weeding out undesirables. But what do you got, Justin? What's on your mind?
For my safe room this week, I want to talk about daylight savings time and how it's good, actually.
Oh, see,
Um,
this is not the kind of spice you get from a fuck waffle.
it's difficult to even like talk about this because I feel like people generally are somewhat confused about the terminology. Like people always like to complain about daylight savings time. Like they'll be like, why do we have daylight savings time? Why should we have daylight savings time? But I think they actually mean they want daylight savings time to be permanent because
Mm.
usually the complaint is that they don't like when the clocks go back in the winter or in the fall.
Yeah.
But that when the clocks go back, that's actually us returning to regular time. Daylight savings time is when the clocks go forward in the spring.
But which came first?
The time we are in the winter, that is regular time. That has as soon as they came up with time or whatever, that was just what it was. Daylight savings time then came later, and daylight savings time was springing forward. Moving the clocks forward in the spring.
Okay.
Because I always feel people complain about the time in the winter, but that's not daylight savings.
That's just time, man.
So I think what they mean is that they want permanent daylight savings time, and this is also this confusion is reflected also just in bills that get introduced because there's always some whatever local state representatives or national representatives, whatever,
You could just say asshole.
that are presenting bills, but sometimes the bills will make daylight savings time permanent. Sometimes they'll be like, don't do daylight savings time at all. But my thing is just that let's ignore all that confusion for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like what people really are against is that the sunset creeps closer to 4:30, and it depends how close you are to a time zone line or whatever. But as you get into December, the sunset creeps closer to 4:30. I think that's really what people don't like. They want the sun to be out later, but I think they maybe don't realize that the sun then would also rise a lot later, like closer to 8:30 or ish or whatever. And to me that seems infinitely worse than having to deal with the sun setting early. I would much rather have the sun up when I'm waking up, taking a shower, eating breakfast, going to work, than have it be light while I'm cooking dinner. Question mark. I don't know what having it be light until 5:30 does for you versus having it be light in the morning. But yeah, I'll let you go in here.
I'm mad that you've persuaded me. I didn't have a hot take, but you have won me over with the sort of idea of making sure that the sun rising earlier is more important than setting later. So point Justin, fine. It's weird to care about it now a little bit more than before because everything's automated, like most things, like your alarms on your phone or on your TV or your car, or like the only thing that is like your oven and your microwave. But probably some people anyways, it's still like the sort of hassle of it doesn't change and I'm late for work. Like most of that has sort of corrected itself with technology. So that's kind of a dumb complaint. The only thing my least favorite thing about daylight savings time is having to hear everybody complain about daylight savings time. So that part you haven't won me over on, but maybe I was thinking the only reason I'd ever get into coding is if I could go and sort of make it so like some smart search or whatever finds every single response video to every single female. Is it feminine frequency or female frequency? Feminist frequency.
Very different.
All right. Females. If I could create some sort of smart search function that finds every single response video to feminist frequency, and also every tweet or post about daylight savings time. If I could just have it and it would always just post "you mad?" ? Then everything would be solved.
Well, let me sway you on the complaining part, though.
Okay.
The only thing that would be worse than complaining about daylight savings time would be if we made daylight savings time permanent, and then having to listen to the people that complained about daylight savings time now complain about how dark it was in the morning.
All right. You know what, Justin? Some days you just fire in all cylinders. Oof. All right. Now I need to make another smart search function with coding that would sort of screen cap everybody who bitched about it. And then if I could post it underneath their new bitch, that would be huge. But I don't write code, so I guess you win this round. Yeah, that's tough. That's really, really tough.
I just glanced at one article about it. They were saying that there were some conflicting studies about possible benefits of going one way or the other or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. None of it was like super persuasive to me. And like what people are actually mad at is that there's just less light in the winter, but they don't know how to articulate that, so they just get mad at daylight savings time. And that just feels completely misguided to me.
Yeah, well, listen, maybe we can sort of get a best of both worlds here, and they'll be like, hey, fuck waffles, here's why daylight savings should be canceled. And then you just know that person just is double bad, and you just don't have, like, either of those points articulated. You're like, all right, I don't have to talk to this person anymore.
That sounds like it could be an actual BuzzFeed article headline.
There is an article that says 19 ways to find out if you're a douche canoe, so... It probably is. Yeah, the BuzzFeedification of a lot of talking points is also on there. Anyway, that's our show. See the show notes for a link to view the artifacts for yourself and view the endnotes.
Artwork by jasartstudios. Music produced by Nicholas Pizzuto.
Rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Facebook and tell a friend or an enemy about the show. Join us again in 3 weeks as we find 2 new texts to discuss. All right, Justin, you want to play a little game of overrated, underrated?
All right, our season 3 current events segment here.
All right, Justin, overrated, underrated. Kyle Rittenhouse supporting Black Lives Matter.
I will say overrated. I honestly don't quite know. I feel like reaction has been all over the place on that, so I don't even know what the rating actually is. But I'll just say overrated. Oh my god, that was someone tweeted out like the writers are wild this season. To Metaverse or Meta. Mm-hmm. So that's already done. But then the other thing that they want to do is like make basically like virtual reality, like Oculus, VR headset type stuff. Where it's just like basically like how we were all on Zoom, like working remotely and going to school remotely and stuff. It would just be like that, but just like forever. Mm-hmm. And instead of being on your computer, you'd be wearing the VR headset.
Jesus.
And your boss would be like a Big Chungus avatar or something like that.
Bring Big Chungus back.